What makes an underrated roller coaster? For me, several different factors come into play when deciding whether or not a coaster deserves the title of being underrated. First and foremost, let's look at some other possibilities. A roller coaster can get a large amount of positive attention amongst enthusiasts, and oftentimes coasters that get this attention rightfully deserve so. Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point is a ride that's gotten a tremendous amount of positive attention since it opened, but the ride happens to be so good that I follow suit. This is an example of a fairly rated roller coaster, at least in my opinion. Other times, coasters can get this amount of positive attention but not quite hold up to those expectations, and as a result may be seen as an overrated ride to you. The opposite of this is when a coaster gets a minimal amount of attention for one reason or another, and you find it to be even better than what most give it credit for. Perhaps this is because the park it's in is in an obscure location, or maybe it's at a smaller park that not as many enthusiasts get around to going to, or in most cases, underrated coasters can be found at parks with such an incredible lineup of rides to where some of them are overshadowed. Now that we know what makes an underrated, overrated, or fairly rated roller coaster, let's focus on what the video is about: underrated rides. I have ridden 222 different roller coasters across North America as of now, and I'll find many of those rides to be underrated. Again, this could be for many different reasons, and I'll definitely touch more on why these rides are underrated when we dive into the list. Just a heads up, you will not be seeing a list on the most overrated coasters I've ridden because I haven't ridden enough of them. I tend to look at the good of each coaster I ride and therefore usually find something positive in the experience it provides without comparing it to others. Also, there are many rides that I consider to be underrated. To narrow it down to only 15 coasters means I have to look at what the most underrated ones are. This is a challenging thing to do, and this list is in fact changing all the time, but I still tried my best to narrow it down for you guys. Last thing before we begin, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. As of late, I've been pumping out these larger lists that take a lot of time to create, so all of the support I receive is appreciated greatly. Now with that all out of the way, this is how I rank my 15 most underrated roller coasters I've personally ridden. Number 15, Sierra Sidewinder at Knott's Berry Farm. You may be wondering, why is a family coaster in the Camp Snoopy section of the park on this list? Well, you see, that's the problem right there. This ride belongs nowhere near Camp Snoopy. It's honestly one of the more intense rides in the park. Sierra Sidewinder is actually a spinning coaster, which may just be the reason why it's as intense as it is. You see, a lot of other spinning coasters have several drops and dips within the layout in which you are risen up to a mid-course brake run or high section of track thereafter. The reason this layout is so much more intense is because it stays low to the ground through fast transitioning and helixes. This is already pretty intense, but spinning through these elements or even going backwards or sideways through them really adds to the experience in my opinion. Number 14, Fahrenheit at Hershey Park. This one's tough. A lot of times there are two groups of preference with this ride. Some find it to be great and others find it to be not so great. I personally really liked it. To me, it rode pretty similar to an Intamin Blitz coaster like Maverick at Cedar Point. So why is this ride so underrated? On one hand, it is overshadowed by rides like Sky Rush, Storm Runner, and now Candemonium. On the other hand, Fahrenheit receives complaints from enthusiasts stating that it feels like a forceless B&M looper, or that the layout is too boring, or that it's pretty rough and shaky. Well, let me just say, none of these applied to my ride experiences at all. It tracked great, the layout was exciting, and it was as smooth as butter. I went in with open-minded expectations and was really surprised coming off because Fahrenheit was really a whole lot of fun. Number 13, Wicked Twister and Possessed at Cedar Point and Dorney Park. So I grouped these two coasters together because I'm generally going to be talking about the Intamin Impulse model as a whole. These are the two I've ridden as of now, and both are severely underappreciated in my opinion. Wicked Twister makes sense. It's at Cedar Point and is very easily overshadowed by the other amazing rides in the park. But Possessed, I don't have a clue why this ride is so underrated. Perhaps it only appears to be recently underrated since the ride didn't operate this season and therefore is getting literally no attention. But even before that, it seemed to be almost as, if not just as underrated as it is now. It's not like it's overshadowed by Dorney's lineup. They don't really have many coasters and Possessed is their only launch coaster. I really don't know, but what I will tell you is that both of these rides are very fun and intense. The launches found later in the ride are surprisingly powerful, and the spikes, straight or twisted, is a whole lot of fun. Number 12, Superman Escape from Krypton at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Okay, this ride could really use some positive attention. People trash on it so much for many reasons, and it being at Magic Mountain doesn't exactly help with that either. I will tell you that Superman doesn't place high on this list because in most rows, it's not very good. But in the front, you get the speed of the other two Strata coasters as you fall down the 400-foot spike, and speed happens to be the reasons I love Dragster and Kingda so much. This ride is ridiculously short, and yes, one could say it's a one-trick pony, but in my opinion, that trick, or at least half of the trick, is really good in the front row. Number 11, Impulse at Knoebels. So this ride is underrated for very obvious reasons in my opinion. For one, enthusiasts go to Knoebels for their fantastic wood coaster collection, so when their only large-scale steel coaster is brought up, it's often left in the dust. Also, many view this ride as a knockoff Gerstlauer Eurofighter, and from what I've gathered over the years is that most people who think this also haven't ridden it. I'm not here to tell you that Impulse is the best ride in the world, but personally I think it rightfully deserves a ride when you come to this park. I for one actually like it just as much as the Gerstlauer Eurofighters, and I do think Impulse is proof that Zero has a surprising amount of potential. Number 10, Canyon Blaster at Adventure Dome. When coaster enthusiasts talk about what the best aerodynamics custom looper is, they often bring up Tennessee Tornado, Viper, maybe Loch Ness Monster, but never do they ever talk about Canyon Blaster. Out of the aero looping coasters I've personally ridden, this is actually my favorite, just above Viper. This coaster is so intense. Even though the layout is pretty similar to Carolina Cyclone at Carowinds, that ride is very obviously much worse than this one. Canyon Blaster runs like a powerhouse in comparison. The ride loses no speed until it hits the final brakes, and I don't know how. All of the inversions are so intense, and my personal favorite moment is the crazy ejector hill before the corkscrew, in which riders experience airtime while you're still recovering from a gray out. I swear, I've never experienced anything quite like that before. This ride is just so strong for an indoor coaster, and therefore finds itself in my lower end of the top 10 most underrated coasters I've ridden. Number 9, Matterhorn Bobsleds at Disneyland. I guess you could make a case that Matterhorn isn't really underrated by the general public, but to coaster enthusiasts who don't usually praise Disney coasters, Matterhorn is very underappreciated. Space Mountain and Incredicoaster usually steal all the attention away from this thing, but in my opinion, the Tomorrowland side of Matterhorn is superior to both of these rides. Oh, and yes, there are two sides to this coaster, one facing Fantasyland and the other facing Tomorrowland. The Tomorrowland side is much more extreme, but both are tons of fun in their own right. So while Matterhorn may be recognized as being a pretty revolutionary coaster, not enough enthusiasts go out of their way to ride it, which is why they fail to realize how much fun the ride experience truly is. Number 8, Kingda at Six Flags Great Adventure. Why is the tallest and second fastest roller coaster in the world this underrated? It's ridiculous. This ride is absolutely amazing, and the only reason enthusiasts trash on it so often is because it's compared to Dragster constantly. Top Thrill Dragster isn't on this list even if it is pretty similar to Kingda because that ride is generally respected in this community. This one, however, gets hate for being considerably rougher and having restrictive restraints. If you're in the front row, neither of these things are an issue. I don't think Dragster is a whole league above Kingda for me, and it really shouldn't for you guys either. I just struggle to pinpoint why one of the most surreal roller coasters on Earth has to be on this list. I love Kingda, and it sits in my overall top 15 coasters I've ridden as of now. Number 7, Scream at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Why does this ride get so much hate? So many people knock on it for being plopped down on a parking lot and for having a bad B&M rattle, but here's why neither of these things bother me. First of all, how are you going to complain about this ride's setting? By no means is it a good one, but it really doesn't impact the ride for me. When you're flying through a bunch of inversions at very fast speeds, it's literally the last thing on your mind. Also, what B&M rattle are people denigrating? I've ridden Scream countless times over the years and I've never felt any rattle, or at least one that ruins your ride experience. To me, it's no more shaky than its clone in New Jersey, Bizarro, which isn't really shaky at all. I just don't get it. Maybe my tolerance is higher than most people's, but still, I don't see how this could be too much of a problem. Oh, and back to this setting, Twisted Colossus is also on a parking lot, so if you want to denigrate Scream, then you better denigrate Twisted Colossus. Scream doesn't exactly rank super high for me at the park since it has so many other coasters to compete with, but it's not a bad ride at all, and I urge you all to give it a back row ride next time you're at the park. Number 6, Rougarou at Cedar Point. Another B&M floorless coaster is Rougarou, which has a similar issue to Scream. The parking lot thing doesn't apply here, but what does is the amount of people knocking on it for being rough. Rougarou isn't rough at all, and for my few rides on it, I found it to be one of the smoothest B&Ms I've ever ridden. Another problem is it is most definitely overshadowed by the park's other coasters. No one drives up to Cedar Point and goes, I can't wait to ride Rougarou. Matter of fact, I bet most people driving up to the park forgets this ride even exists. That's totally fine, and I've been guilty of this in the past too, but for when you do ride it, keep an open mind. It's really not a bad ride, and honestly, I look forward to when I can next ride it. Number 5, Wavebreaker the Rescue Coaster at SeaWorld San Antonio. I don't really see this ride get trash talked much on YouTube, but on the Instagram side of the community, people make fun of this ride constantly. They say it puts them to sleep and that it's the most forceless coaster ever, etc. Personally, I don't understand this at all. The ride is literally a family coaster. Also, I rarely ever make it a point to ride a family coaster numerous times when I visit a park for the first time, but Wavebreaker was an exception. This is honestly up there with the most fun and enjoyable rides I've ever been on. Wavebreaker is also quite a bit more forceful than I was expecting. Maybe it's because of the riding position, but the launches had a decent kick to them. As a whole, there's many reasons to why this coaster deserves to be respected far more than it actually is. It's not forceless, and it's a very fun coaster. Number 4, Mighty Canadian Mindbuster at Canada's Wonderland. This is the first of 2 coasters at Canada's Wonderland that made it on this list, with the other coming up in just a bit. If you watched my coaster ranking video for this park a little while back, then you know I find several of the coasters here underrated, but there are 2 that stand above the rest as genuinely solid coasters. Mindbuster is one of them, and it gets a lot of hate for being a rough ride, and depending on the year you've ridden it, I could see how this could be the case. That said, it appeared that Wonderland was maintaining it to perfection when I rode it in 2019. There wasn't a single rough patch for me, even if some of the track profiling in some sections were questionable. This coaster doesn't exactly have a ton of standout elements, but the way it runs is enough to place it way up here. I say this because it's one of the most hated coasters on this list and possibly one of the most hated on wood coasters in the world. It simply doesn't deserve this at all. It's a real classic and it's held up great over time in my opinion. Number 3, Big Apple Coaster at New York, New York Hotel and Casino. I bet this was a surprise. The Big Apple Coaster in Las Vegas may actually be the most hated on roller coaster on the planet. I went in expecting a pretty brutal ride and came up saying that was the worst coaster in the world. Honestly, it's not really even rough outside of the vertical loop. The transitions just happen to be a bit wonky and therefore it's a little jerky. Throughout these moments, however, I got no painful headbanging. Maybe my height was perfect for riding this thing at the time, but the unnecessary shoulder restraints didn't affect me nearly as much as I thought it would. I will say, not much happens during the second half, but the first half is surprisingly solid. I rode this coaster in the front and therefore really enjoyed its speed, dive loop, and incredible view from the top of the lift hill. Out of all the coasters on this list, I bet barely any of you will agree with me here, but I do enjoy this ride for what it is, which is why it clocks in at the top 3 on this list. Number 2, Wild Beast at Canada's Wonderland. Here's the other Canada's Wonderland coaster I was talking about. I think this was the ride I rode the second or third most times when I was at this park, simply because it didn't have a long line very often and it is very re-rideable to me. I know many of you are probably rolling your eyes at me right now, but Wild Beast was remarkably smooth for an old woody with such a poor reputation. I will say, I only rode this coaster in the front row, so maybe that's why, but this thing was just so much fun. And not only was Wild Beast a smooth wood coaster, but it even had some airtime moments and some mild laterals, which was really surprising to me. I know not everyone gets the chance to visit this park since it's in Canada, but if you do, I really hope you enjoy Wild Beast as much as I did. Number 1, Gale Force at Playland's Castaway Cove. First thing to take note of, I think I may know why Gale Force is so underappreciated. Many reviews that you'll hear from enthusiasts was from when this coaster first opened. Back then, it was widely considered to be one of the shakiest coasters in the world, and in general was unbearable to ride. Since then, however, they've retracked the whole thing and extended the ride duration to nearly double what it used to be. This may appear to make the ride repetitive, but no way am I complaining about practically riding Gale Force twice for the price of one ride. Plus, these elements are actually incredible. Take note of the fact that I only rode in the front, but anyways, let's run through the layout. You start off with a swing launch, the third of which is incredibly forceful. Then up a twisted top hat with a beyond vertical drop. This is a wild element, dare I say disorienting. The drop also provides some powerful ejector airtime. Next, there's an outer bank turnaround. The track profiling here is absolutely screwed up, but in the best way possible. This results in some more awesome ejector. Following this is the world's only kickflip element. It's essentially an Immelman that spirals so fast to the point where it doesn't invert riders, just barely. For those of you who do classify this as an Immelman, this is probably the best one I've ever experienced. Lastly, there's a very compact dive loop that is definitely the weakest of the elements we've discussed, but nonetheless, still a whole lot of fun. So that's what you can expect from Gale. Just kidding, let's go through all these elements again. See why this coaster is so amazing now? I've been non-stop talking about it for several minutes and don't want it to end. There's so much to say about Gale Force, but simply put, it's an incredible elite coaster that deserves far more attention than it receives nowadays. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video in which I've covered my personal top 15 most underrated roller coasters I have ever ridden. As always, please feel free to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. There's lots of awesome content coming that you guys definitely won't want to miss. Again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye guys.